Near-death experiences, Tom? Had any?
Have I had any near-death experiences? I nearly got run over once, but I narrowly avoided it with my wit. I just narrowly avoided it. No, why have you had a near-death experience?
Yeah, I ended up upside down in a Cessna 125, 5,000 feet above the Essex countryside as a 17-year-old.
What, you were flying it?
Yeah, I was flying it solo. Left a bit of power on 1700 RPM, and I should have cut the engine entirely.
You can fly a plane?
Yeah, before I could drive. Anyway, so it's part of Air Force scholarships. I'm pulling back.
It's impressive.
I stall, but because I've left a bit of power on it, drops onto one wing, and I end up upside down 5,000 feet above a lake. I'm 17 and a half, and you know what I thought?
What?
It's been good. Seriously. I was like, it's been good.
So you were, what's a Cessna? Is that like...
It's a very light aircraft that you basically can't crash. So I'm upside down, going down at the floor, and then I remember, after I'd kind of made peace, I remembered, oh yeah, you need to use a bit of opposite rudder. So I applied a bit of opposite rudder. The plane rights itself. I fly home for 20 minutes, green. And when I land and tell them all in the bar, what do?
What?
All of the flying instructors piss themselves for about an hour.
Mate, well, yeah, like it could have been you and Otis Redding, couldn't it, really?
Absolutely. Well, I was 10 years shy of the 27 club. But
Buddy Holly, the Big Bop Man, and all those guys.
Yeah.
Wow, you can actually fly a plane. I don't have anything. I can skateboard. I can unicycle.
Mate, that's impressive. Any near-death experiences on the unicycle?
No. I've lived a shy and an interesting life compared to you. I'm starting to realise with your last week's cat grooming show.
I'm not sure that counts as.
And this week's
pushing the envelope.
Upside down, like Top Gun-esque. Like
I wouldn't say Top Gun-esque.
But upside down 5,000. Like, how long would it take you to fall 5,000 feet going at speed? Like, seconds?
No, not long. No, a good chunk of time. Like a good couple of minutes. You can't crash those things. They just like flip back over.
So we were gonna do a podcast this week on work, on earning a crust, and then we kept like, nah, it's not
controversial. It's not interesting.
So we're doing a podcast on death.
We should crack on.
Let's crack on with the Innovation Ramble. Right, here we are again in TSC Champagne Bar, the Europe's longest and coolest and loveliest champagne bar. Thanks to the Drum for being our partner. If you're watching this on video, hello, hi, give me a wave.
Hello everybody.
If you're on SoundCloud or iTunes, brilliant. If you could give us a 5-star review, that will help keep us being the #1 podcast in the business section of the new and noteworthy part of iTunes. So thanks for everyone who's given us a review, and if you haven't already, please give us another one. That would really help us reach a wider audience and keep us in warm breakfasts at CSU's.
Yep. So this is the Innovation Ramble. It's our weekly podcast, picking a topic at a time, diving into it, bringing you the latest and juiciest innovations. This week it's death.
Yeah, it's death. So it's a tricky one. We don't be disrespectful, but
I don't think
no one's listening to
happen.
half an hour of like dour, miserable death stuff.
Yeah, but everybody's also interested in death. It's sexy. There's a lot of taboo. There's a lot of a lot of interest about it. And if you like this episode and you're after previous episodes, then pop along to theinnovationramble.com where you can sign up for our regular email and read the show notes and get access to previous episodes. Money, addiction, sex, you name it.
But before you do that, I'm going to take you back to June 10th, 1986, and a girl called Michelle Funk. What a great name.
Good name.
To start a podcast episode. So she fell into a creek, I think they call it a river over here, in Salt Lake City, and she spent over an hour in freezing water. She was only 2.5 years old, and she was rescued by the medical services, and she was given a heart and lung bypass to help kind of rewarm the body. And after 3 hours, that's an hour frozen, freezing water, and then 3 hours, she took her breath and she breathed back to life. Wow. And she's still with us today. And I think basically there's been several stories now where people who've been very cold have been brought back to life. And I think you're going to touch on the medical reasons for that shortly. But in the medical profession, there's this common refrain which says, you're not dead until you're warm and dead. And we're really sort of seeing the boundaries of what death actually means from a medical standpoint.
Yeah, and that's all predicated on what's happening at a cellular level. So in her case, her cells are chilled down. There's no disintegration of the cells, and that's how we die. We die because our cells break down, and they can break down in different ways. So you've got atrophy, which is basically just the cell just wasting away kind of naturally. You've got apoptosis, which is where cells choose to kill themselves. So it's planned, programmed cell death. So in the womb, little babies, when their fingers split, that's because apoptosis happens between the fingers. Those cells break down naturally, so the fingers can be individual. And then you've got senescence, which is the ability of a cell to continue functioning and to or the gradual deterioration of the cell function. So as it atrophies, the senescence, so its ability to function, will drop. But it doesn't always happen. There's not always a direct correlation. So cells can die and organisms can continue to function properly even when stuff's atrophying. And this happens with humans in their autumnal years, 80s, 90s, where we start to see a plateau where even though people are getting older, they're not necessarily dying at an increased rate. So senescence is all about the gradual deterioration function and the mortality that we have as our cells are dying.
So it is fascinating the way that over time what dead actually means is kind of extending, and there's a real grey area, but it wasn't always quite like this. It's brilliant. So the Good Samaritans, I don't know how they've come into it, in the 1700s, they started to take an interest in people who drowned. So they wanted to make sure that they were dead, and not sure why. So here's what they did to work out if people were still dead after they drowned: tickling the back of their throat with a feather.
Okay.
Which I quite like.
That would do it.
Blowing tobacco smoke into the rectum.
Okay.
Or whipping. Can you imagine that? Like you're not technically dead. Someone drags you out of the river, blows a bit of pipe smoke up your bum, tickles the back of your throat, and then starts flogging you. You'd wake up.
You're gonna know. Yeah, one of those three things.
But there's some really great innovations that are prolonging life in extreme situations. I saw that there was a defibrillator on a drone.
Yeah.
So someone could request a drone, and so if someone's collapsed in Hyde Park, then they would send a defib out. But it has a video camera on it that links back to a physician. So if someone's needs defibrillation, they would actually talk them through it with a speaker on the drone and a video camera. So that's a really lovely innovation for keeping people alive.
That reminds me of something we brought up on a previous episode. People have sign up to an app that lives in their smartphone. And
that was a good one.
If you sign up for the service, then if somebody has a heart attack,
and you know how to do resuscitation.
Yeah, they basically a passerby, I guess, would phone in the ambulance, and then if you've got the app, it'll beep if you're a doctor, and you can give cardiac arrest and you're close by, then it gets you there quicker. So, and I saw an interesting story that's coming out of the shootings that happen in the US, where there's an attachment to a gun that will slow bullets down so people don't die. I mean, you'd have to choose to put the attachment on your gun in the first place, but gun deaths are counting.
You slow bullets down?
Yeah, it sits on the front of the gun and it basically slows the bullet down as it's leaving. So what you'd end up with in the US is fewer gun deaths, and you'd still have injuries and potentially fatalities, but fewer deaths because bullets are being slowed down. But you'd have to choose to attach that on your gun. So the suggestion is that the police might need to have this fitted to their weapons as standard, so that they'd end up killing fewer innocent or not innocent citizens.
That's really dark.
Talking in terms of extending life, so there's been a huge amount of focus on stem cells in the last few years. We've got 30 trillion human cells in our body, and the reasons that we can't regenerate new ones, even when the older ones die, is that either we deplete our reserves of stem cells, or our stem cells undergo epigenetic change, which is epigenetics is any kind of change that happens that isn't influenced by it's anything other than a DNA sequence influencing the cell. So normally it's our DNA that influences the cell. So any external force that affects the cell is epigenetics, and there's all kinds of factors that aren't biological that could affect it. So the central dogma of molecular biology used to be that biological information can only be passed in one direction, from DNA to RNA to proteins, and now actually it's been proved that the chain can work the other way, which makes sense. Biology and humans and living tissue tend to work in all kinds of different ways, so I'm not surprised that it's been disproved that it only works in one way. What that means is you actually, as a human being, can affect your longevity, your genetics. So your thoughts, your actions, what you eat, how healthy you live, how much sleep you get, all of these things affect how your genes actually behave. And so we have the ability to affect our longevity and our life through our emotions, which regulate genetic expression, through human nutrition, and we know that there are various cruciferous vegetables, garlic, onion, broccoli, that actually act as which block certain chemicals, allowing our kind of tumour suppressor genes to activate and fight. So through positive thoughts and actions in food, we can influence our life.
That is incredible broccoli knowledge there, Al.
Actually, we had broccoli before. It was on food. It was being harvested. So maybe broccoli, important vegetable and innovation.
The food episode. That was a good one. So it's interesting you talk about all that stuff, because it really shows the contemporary fixation of what we've seen throughout all cultures, and that is an obsession with death and living beyond it. Almost all cultures have some form of life after death. So there's a really great talk I saw on it. They called them immortality myths. And so what we're going to do in the next section is just go through each of these myths and give some historical examples, but also contemporary examples of those things existing. And the reasons that they're there is, Heidegger said that because we only live for 70 to 100 years, that we're rushed into panicked thought about our mortality, and consequently making decisions about faith and religion and so on. And another way it's been talked about is a terror management theory, that we all have this baked in fear of death. Maybe you can remember when you were a kid, when you first realised you were going to die.
Sure.
And you're like, whoa, and that never really goes.
No.
So in order to make us feel better about the fact that we're going to die, we come up with different narratives for what happens after death.
Yeah.
So and I think you were saying that there's a prize.
Yeah. There is a prize. So last year, Silicon Valley hedge fund manager Jun Yun, I hope I pronounced that right, he launched a $1 million prize challenging scientists to try and hack life beyond the 120 years that is kind of standard at the moment. It's called the Palo Alto Longevity Prize, and so far I think 15 or so scientific teams have entered. So they're trying to extend it.
And this is it. This is exactly the first one. So it's the elixir of life.
Yeah.
The fountain of youth.
Absolutely.
This is something that we've been after for time immemorial, looking for that secret potion. I mean, there's some crazy stuff, like people injecting like a mixture of animal semen into their veins to kind of bring back their vitality to flagging men. And Ray Kurzweil, the kind of famous Googler, director of engineering, he believes that humans will be immortal by the end of the century.
Yeah, he's a fascinating individual. He's 65 years old. He looks incredibly young. He admits to popping 150 different vitamin pills a day, and his plan is basically it's a bridge-to-bridge strategy. So he's looking to just simply extend his life long enough that the next piece of advanced technology or bioengineering arrives, so that he can further extend, because he's hoping to still be around when we get to the point where you can do mind uploading. And we saw this recently. Hannah Critchlow from Cambridge University got the internet very excited when she talked about it being possible to upload our brains to computers. We just need to find machines that have 100 trillion circuit connections, and then it'll be possible. So Ray, he's hanging on with his pills and his clean living, hoping that he'll make it to the event horizon that unlocks immortality for him.
So I didn't really understand this till we discussed it earlier, but this is the practice of essentially replacing different parts of our body. So your leg stops working, you get a cyborg leg, essentially. Your lungs pack in, get some new lungs. All right, your brain's gone to shit, so you upload that consciousness elsewhere, get a new brain, re-upload that consciousness, eyes. So eventually you don't really die. You're pursuing the fountain of youth by just almost like a kind of Lego replacement of different bits of your body, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this has been going on for years already. We have contact lenses, we have artificial hips, we have smart watches that are on the outside now that are moving in. We are already transhuman, and we're moving increasingly quickly towards a state of being post-human. British gerontologist, Aubrey Gray. She predicted in 2008 that actually the first child had already been born that was going to live 1,000 years. And transhumanism is moving at pace. There's suggestions that in 200 years we will be operating like as godlike cyborgs with different attachments and different components that are helping extend our life.
But it's not just humans, is it? This already exists in nature to a degree, right?
It does indeed, yeah. So there's a particular jellyfish that is immortal. It's called the Turritopsis dornii with 2 eyes jellyfish. I'm really smashing the terms today. This jellyfish from Japan, it's able to reverse its aging process. So when it gets sick or injured, what it does is it reverses the process and goes back to being into the polyp stage. So it reverses and goes back to kind of adolescence or childhood, and then returns to being an adult later. So we really don't know how long it's been around. These things could live forever, and a lot of studies, some of the more bullish ones are suggesting that we may be able to take some of this learning from this jellyfish and apply it to us. So there's a chap called the guy who's studying it. I can't remember his name, Shin Kubotu of Kyoto University. He says that we may be able to extend our human lifespan indefinitely. He says that if he thought, the reason he's studying them is he thought if he studied them he could learn more about being a human. And he wishes that he's only got 100 years on the planet, he says, and he wishes that he were around for 10 or 20,000 years in order that he could really understand these jellyfish. And that just got me thinking, if I was around for 20,000 years, I'm not sure I'd spend the whole time studying one jellyfish.
But I think there's a selfishness there from an ethical, and biological point of view. The reason that life has evolved is because of death. Like, the death basically just gets rid of the weak and has allowed us to develop. And really, do we actually want to preserve ourselves for 10,000 years? I do my best to be a good human being, but when I croak at it 60 or 70 or whatever it is, then I'm sure there'll be millions and millions of better versions of different type of people. And I just think it's really ego driven and arrogant to go, I should definitely be here for 10,000 years.
Well, it's slipped into part of popular culture, though. Using it's going to sound weird, but the cloud. We're using cloud-based services, which means if I make a mistake, Control Z. Control Z is the new god. Control Z, the undo function, that basically is like time travel. We can go backwards, and with something like Google Docs, where you've got the entire life history of a document in the cloud, I can go backwards to the beginning of time of that document. So it's seeped into public culture that you can actually kind of go backwards in time a little bit before you go forward. So I'm not surprised that something to think about, well, if I could just rewind to last week, maybe unage a bit, and then I could move forward in a different direction.
So the next section, the next immortality myth,
the second one,
is resurrection. Obviously massively a big hit in the Christian faith. So the one project that I saw that was really interesting was called Project Elysium. So what this is a way that you can preserve the memory of a loved one through virtual reality.
Yeah.
So say, for example, you met a tragic accident and I wanted to preserve your memory. What I would have done is taken a 360 view of you and created a 3D animated version.
Yeah.
So and I would obviously record your voice, record your answers to lots of questions, lots of different opinions, so I could put on a VR headset and talk to you about anything that we've ever talked about. So I say, Al, have you ever had a near-death experience? But yes, I was upside down in a Cessna. But you would respond in a way. So this is a VR almost portrait of that person.
Makes perfect sense. The tech's pretty much available. You brought up the brilliant Bina 48,
24,
Bina 24, and there are lots of services doing this. So Attorney.me, they also provide a virtual version of their users, and they're promising a kind of Skype chat from the future. And what happens is you create your own avatar, but then with Attorney.me you basically talk to it for the next 20 or 30 years. So what it does is it goes and scrapes all of your data from Facebook, Twitter, emails, photos, and it does two things. One, it makes sense of all that information about Tom Ollerton, and then it starts to emulate you. Once that's set up, then you start talking, I'm guessing, to yourself for as long as you're alive, and it's learning the whole time, so that when you do pass on, it is like as close to you as possible. So grandchildren, great grandchildren come and ask Tom a question.
It'll be good for us with all this hours and hours of podcasts. We'll have like the best one. Quite why anyone would want to talk to me in 8 years' time about 2013 views of 15.
They probably want to check if your predictions are right or not.
Oh my god, yeah. And then there's obviously the last version to talk about resurrection is cryogenics, cryonics, which is the act of freezing someone and freezing the process of entropy so that you could actually reanimate someone. And the science is crazy. So basically, is even if your brain's frozen at ridiculous degrees Kelvin, actually they would have to create nanobots to individually move all the molecules back into a place where they originally were, so you could then be reanimated. So that's a resurrection myth or not myth to be discussed. So the next resurrection story that we tell ourselves as cultures is the concept of the soul.
Yeah, and you talked about the lady being pulled out, Michelle Funk being pulled out of the lake. Recently, 2 years ago, I think, some students and researchers at Southampton University were able to prove that for 2 or 3 minutes after death, we were still conscious. So the body might have died, but actually not all of us has died. And the way they were able to prove it is stories from in those individuals that were credible, but also for a couple of them, kind of beeping machines that were on in the room and things that happened in the room that these individuals couldn't have known about because the sounds were taking place after their clinical death. So they were having these kind of like out of body experiences, and it seems to me like that is the soul, isn't it? That feels like that's the kind of definition of a soul. If you're clinically dead but you're still alive and you're still engaged.
I have quite strong views about this. I don't know if this is the forum to get into it, but Christina Lai, who works with us, who's totally brilliant, she was telling us about a Chinese culture about the soul, because their belief is that the soul lives on after death.
Yep.
And what they do as part of the grieving and burial process, they create paper replicas of the things that will be valuable to that person to their soul and person in the afterlife. So you get things like they'll make a paper version of their pets, for example.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop there, and they're called Joss paper offerings, and they do things. There's been like concubines or laptops, air conditioner units, Viagra, brandy, cigarettes, Louis Vuitton shoes, shavers, iPhones, and Apple Watches. They will make paper versions of them that you can buy pre-made, and then as part of that the passing on process, they will burn them. So the idea that this would go on into the afterlife, I mean, we've seen that with the terracotta army, the pharaohs. The idea of sort of being buried with your possessions is a real physical embodiment of our view of a lot of cultures' idea of the soul. So we've had resurrection, we've had the elixir of life, and we've had the soul.
Yeah.
And I think probably for me the most believable story of immortality is the story of legacy. That we all try to live on after death through some form of legacy, be it philanthropy. But you were saying some really interesting stuff about Facebook.
Yeah, so there's a few services out there, quite a few now, that are starting to offer management of your digital estate after you've died. So there's a company called Planned Departure, nice name, and they estimate through a PwC report that the value of individuals' assets in the UK, all their digital assets, about £25 billion worth of virtual digital assets that are out there. A third of consumers saying they wouldn't be able to get access to that, and so Planned Departure are helping you plan for your afterlife, what happens to those assets, who gets control to it. So it's a kind of legal and will style service. And you mentioned Facebook. They've just rolled out recently in Australia a new feature called a legacy content feature. And that would mean that you'd be able to nominate somebody who could go in after your death on Facebook, and they're not taking control of your profile, but they can kind of post and update people as that nominated individual, kind of manage your Facebook profile.
Can they go through all of your messages?
I'm not sure the exact detail. I mean, obviously you won't be here unless you've been cryogenically frozen.
Well, cool.
But you can also in Facebook instruct your Facebook account to self-destruct in the event of your death. So if you don't want anyone to get access, so maybe that would be a better option for you.
Do you think someone comes back in a transhuman form or cryogenic form and their engagement rate is it's gone down massively? I can't believe you let my Instagram slip.
If I made it back from the dead, I'm not sure I'd be spending my time on Facebook. I'd be out living it up.
But that'd be like the reflex of waking up in the morning, wouldn't it? You'd be like, oh, I better just check my emails. What?
Yeah.
I've got 50 years worth of email. So finally, this
you
is
need to put your out of body on.
Oh. I haven't responded to this email because I'm
Go
dead.
on.
However, I do spend £100,000 a year on cryogenic support.
Yeah.
So, maybe. So the final one for me is from Indonesia. There's an island called Tanah Toraja where the families live with the bodies of the dead. So when the significant person in that culture or that village or that family dies, they treat the body so that they can have it in the house. So so basically the kids will play with their dead grandparents actually sat there in the chair, and it's not seen as weird or macabre. It's part of the grieving process that someone is alive and then they are dead, and then they stay with the family in their physical form as they deteriorate. And then eventually there will be, sometimes like 5 or 6 years later, they will have a funeral, which is the whole town, which is this wonderful celebration of their life. And the size of that festival reflects the importance of that person in the community. So they don't see a dead body as an issue, actually an important part of the grieving process, which is a totally innovative way of looking at death.
I loved that. Christina talked about having, relatives buried kind of in the garden on the homestead. I think that's fantastic that they're there. They're still part of the community. I mean, it's totally alien for us here in the UK, but I can see how that would help in the grieving process. And
to finish off, there's been some quite amusing uses of people's dead bodies.
Yes. So I thought this is a brilliant story. A guy called Edward Heydrich, he invented the frisbee, plastic frying frisbee. I think he started on beaches in America with a kind of very early prototype, passing it around, and then that evolved and he innovated and created the frisbee. When he died in 2002, his last wishes were that he would be cremated and then part of his ashes put into this frisbee so that his friends and family could play with it. And I thought, best of all, some of them were sold to benefit the Ed Heydrich Memorial Museum. I mean, talk about turning ideas into invoices. He's cremated and then he's sold. He's actually making a real inventor and innovator through and through. He's making money even from his death.
And other such innovations ashes have been made into space capsules, taxidermy, and dildos. I think is my favourite one. Going back to how that didn't make it into the sex episode, I've absolutely no idea.
No, totally.
So do you think we've done death?
I think we have. Immortality for me, it's surely going to become a possibility. And
you really believe that?
I think it's going to happen much sooner than you think. I think if we're looking at 200 years for cyborgs, I think immortality is going to be on us a lot sooner. I'm not sure that's a good thing because death is a natural part of the cycle of life. But I think we're about to free ourselves, from the bonds of death, as we did with conception, with the contraception, the pill in the 60s. Lots of reports and experts saying that the transhuman revolution is going to be the most significant thing that has ever happened to us as a species.
So my view is that we've always chased the elixir of life. We've always thought about resurrection. We've always thought about this idea of a soul, and we've always talked about legacy. And every year, every time thinks that they're at the forefront of science. We look back 50 years, or 100 years, or 300 years, and we laugh at it. And we'll do the same. We'll look back and we'll guffaw at ourselves at our idea of like transhumanism potentially. So I think I'm the other side of the coin here. I'm like, we've always done this. We've always tried to cheat death, but death is ultimately what makes us having lived. And you remove that, I don't know.
I'm with you. It is the cycle of life, and if we were to remove that, I'm sure nature, science, there will be some kind of unusual backlash. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. If we don't die, then something else is going to happen. So it could be scary, and that's probably a good time to move on to our final quotes.
I'm going to shout outs. Let's do the shout outs. So CSEs, thanks to Victor this morning. Matthew Kempton for our logo design.
Great logo.
Christina Live for just being brilliant.
James Harrison, fantastic spring summer photo shoots.
Sam Scott for doing our video editing.
Yeah.
Thanks to the drum for being our partner.
Thank you to the drum. Amazing.
Give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. We'll literally love you forever. We'll see you at Social Media Week for the live episodes.
Live one. Yep. Thanks to Matt Williams for tweeting in this week. Appreciate
that was
Matt.
Funny. Thanks,
Cheers.
Matt.
And I would say to Eurostar, we're really serious. We're coming for you. Come and get us on one of your trains. Let's have it real time. Thanks, Charlie, for that suggestion.
So, is your quote going to be better than mine?
I don't know, Tom. I think we're probably both.
Do you want to go first, or shall I go first? No, is yours profound or is it funny?
It's more profound.
Right, we'll end with profound.
Okay.
Right, so Robert Towery, convicted of murder in 1991 and sentenced to death by lethal injection in 2012. His final words were, "I love my family. Potato, potato, potato."
Well, if you're going to sign out, you should make it memorable. I'm going to quote one of the great entrepreneurs and business mavericks of all time, the phenomenal Steve Jobs, and his take on the cycle of life and death. Steve said, obviously once he'd been diagnosed and his life was coming to a close, he spoke in front of some students and said, "Death is very likely the single best invention of life. It is life's change agent."
Thanks, Jobsy.
Thanks.
And we'll see you next week.
We will do. Cheers.